Hello, and welcome to episode 1 of Tales from the Tables of Havok. I am your host, DM Havok. Today's story is about knowing your role, understanding your character. Back in the mid to late 90s, I was involved in an AD&D campaign that included a lot of dungeon delving. And as such, we were pretty brave adventurers. We were fearless because we thought at third level that we were invincible. Because our dungeon master was nice to us. Well, he stopped being nice and fudging his rolls, and we found out exactly how the world works, so to speak. In this case, I was playing a dwarf fighter named Rakir Feyhammer. He was a dwarf from the Feywild. He grew up there somehow, and basically, on his naming day, he was booted from the Feywild and into onto the Sword Coast, which is pretty typical, actually, now that I think about it. Because it seems like there's a lot of Fae on the Sword Coast. In the Forgotten Realms campaign setting. Well, we had gone through the first couple of levels of the Underdark. We'd visited Elminster. We drank with Drizzt, and then we decided, hey, let's go to Menzoberranzan. That in itself was probably a stupid idea, but I'm gonna let that slide because that moved the story along. So in this DM's version of the campaign setting, the Underdark had not. The Underdark was basically closed for business. They hung a sign and said, "Hey, everyone who's from the surface, go fuck yourselves. We don't want you here. And by the way, we don't want to be on the surface either. So let's leave each other alone." And they thought this was a good idea. So we decided, screw that. So we found a way in. We were in the city of Neverwinter, and we found this old rundown tavern. It was dilapidated. It looked like it hadn't been occupied for about 100 years, but it was still there. Whatever. You'd think that that Dagalt Neverember would take care of his shit. Apparently not. So we get into the basement of this tavern, and we start doing the usual adventurer things. When you go on a delve, you check for traps. You do spot checks. You look for anything out of place, and you seek treasure. Well, we didn't find anything but a couple of giant rats. Not dire rats, just and not giant, capital G, giant as in big ass rats. And we fought the hell out of them. In fact, one went into a small burlap sack because rat in a sack. Um, so we find a secret entrance hidden at the bottom of a barrel, and we made our way down into the sub basements, which started to look more and more like a dungeon. However, we weren't finding anything. We weren't engaged in any sort of combat. We fell into a sense of complacency. We didn't think that anything was going to go down from there. Well, see, that right there is the mentality that a dungeon master waits for. He thinks, ooh, good, they've let their guard down. Ooh, it's time for me to pull out some tricks. And so I my character Rick here found a strangely sturdy wooden door and approached it. It was made of like really, really fine oak, and it didn't look damaged. It didn't look worn, which should have been warning number one, but I was a teenager. So, and by this point we had been looking around for a couple of hours. So Rick here threw open the door, and lo and behold, a treasure chest. I get within 10 feet of it, pull out the 10-foot pole, poke, and it goes thud, rattle, rattle, rattle. Not a mimic. So I approach. At this point, I really should have had my head in the game and been thinking, ooh, this may be a little too easy. Because I stepped on a springboard. And anyone who's familiar with AD&D, especially Dungeon Delves, will be very, very familiar with the concept of a springboard. They have usually enough force to spring a minotaur. So, step forward, sproing, and Rekier Feyhammer was impaled upon a ceiling spike. There we go. Words hard. English. It's early. He was impaled on a ceiling spike. Well, he survived that. The initial damage was only about 1d12, and like I said, we were level 3, maybe level 4, 5, somewhere around there. But yeah, sproing. And what killed him, again, was not the spike. What killed him was the fact that the sproing, the springboard, whatever, thrust him so hard that upon the impact with the ceiling, he took another 1d10 damage. Essentially falling in reverse damage. And if that wasn't bad enough, because someone had a Rod of Resurrection, they could have, scraped me off the ceiling and cast Resurrect on me. There was a, oh crud, I forget what monster it was. Tell me in the comments. It's kind of like a piercer, but it's a, it looks like an octopus. And when it falls, it goes and starts to wriggle around. Well, there was one right next to my head. and it must have gone, ooh, snack. Chomp, 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 chomp. Yeah. All because I didn't think this is too easy. This right here smells like a trap. In hindsight, of course. Yeah. But knowing your roles is very important. And when I say knowing your roles, I mean your role as character. Your role as the character, your role as the player, and especially your dice rolls. Now, it's D&D. Dice rolls are important. Because how the hell else are you going to resolve your skill checks and things like that? Well, let me tell you a story about a wizard named Drake. Drake was he was special. He had a lot of wisdom, but not a lot of charisma. Think of an above average intelligence for a person with the charisma of a fucking minotaur. And you'd have you would essentially have Drake's personality. No one liked him, not even his own traveling companions. They picked on him at every chance they got. This pissed the player off immensely, but it's role playing. It's character building, it's world building. But I'll get into those concepts another day, and why you should really just roll with the picking on and the all that. But the player was fairly new at the time, and of course this was my first game with my first game in the world building concept for building the fuck. See? Words. Anyway. He was part of the first group of adventurers in the world building campaign for the Runes of Havok campaign setting. It was essentially season 0 of what's going on now. But like I said, his player was relatively new to D&D and didn't know that he needed to know his roles. He was good at spellcasting. He was actually pretty decent in combat for a wizard. But this group was a traveling set of minstrels led by a multi-class bard paladin. Then there was and he was a human. There was a Sylvan elf druid, and then there was the human wizard, Drake. And they performed for money, which is what you do, You get downtime, you play a show. You gain money. Well, it's also a good idea to do in session, simply because doing so, for one, it builds improv skill. And two, it's a good way to gather rumors, because now you've performed. Everyone is either happy with your performance or not so happy with your performance. And in this one particular case, they were playing a show at the Two Nail Inn, just a few miles north of Nilra, on the southwestern coasts of the Aubergine Kingdom. Well, they were playing their show. The Bard Paladin told a poem about a gnome who roams. In fact, that was the title. It was actually kind of a good, an awesome moment, because the player just pulled a poem right out of his ass. The whole time, the elf druid was doing some bow tricks and some fire tricks, because I have a certain rule on Exile that if you are a magic user, you immediately have a few granted spells, depending on your class. The wizards and druids got prestidigitation, so, fire tricks, stuff like that. Drake walked up to the bartender and said, "Sir, may I borrow some blades?" And you probably know where this is going. The bartender, confused as hell, said, "Sure," lays out some blades on the counter. Drake picks up and balances 5 of them and makes sure they're good. Goes up on the stage and attempts to juggle daggers. Well, perform in 5th edition D&D is a charisma check. It's a charisma-based skill. However, I'm also aware that in 5th edition D&D, you can move skill proficiencies around a little bit. Such as, if you were, say, you're a stripper. Fuck it. I don't know how else to put it. You're a dancer. Perform would actually, in that case, be a combination of charisma with performance and dexterity with performance. If you're a bodybuilder, or, say, a dance fighter, say you are employed by the arena in the capital of the Aubergine Kingdom to fight merely for entertainment, but not to hurt, and not to kill at least, you would then use performance with strength and performance with dex, things like that. You know what I mean. Well, in certain cases, I like to rely on passives, because it condenses the dice rolls, and usually passives are higher than what you're gonna fucking roll on the dice anyway. So I made him roll his charisma, and I was gonna rely on passive dexterity plus the charisma bonus, or plus the perform bonus. Well, his charisma was rolled at such a low point that he had a -4 to his charisma. So he botched. He botched rolling a 2, which, rolling a 2 is not necessarily a bad thing. However, when you botch at a 2 and you have a -4, you go below 0. And that's what he did. Juggling daggers on stage, he caught all 5 of them. 1 to his face, a couple to his shoulders, and a few in the chest. I need to lock these doors. Whatever. So basically, they revived him, but I almost didn't let it happen because it's like, I want to teach you a lesson. I told the player that. You're new, I understand, but let me use this as a learning tool, a teaching tool. Know your roles. Know your stats and your skills. Know your proficiencies. Know your bonuses. Know your saves. He even botched his dexterity save for it. So, know your roles, people. Thanks for watching.